Good morning. I'm playing hide and seek with the sun this morning. And it's smoothie time, one of my favorite times of the day. Rick and I are in Baltimore this morning. We're getting ready to continue northward towards the C&D Canal. I wanted to show you the work I did in the boatyard down in Norfolk, and then the portion of the trip from Norfolk to Solomons Island. I'm also going to throw in what little I know about AIS. This is some information and knowledge that I picked up over the winter when I installed AIS on my boat. I'm not an expert. I may have made some mistakes, so bear with me, but at least I'll tell you what little I know about it. Check it out. If you own a yacht, it is generally going to have to be pulled out of the water occasionally. So you can do maintenance projects on the portion of the boat that is underwater most of the time. Much like a car, you can either pay someone to do these projects for you, or you can save a little money by doing them yourself. Unlike a car, you don't need a diagnostic computer to do most of the work. Boaters usually have their boat hauled out every year or two. My boat seems to do okay on an every other year haul-out schedule, and I generally do projects by myself. The projects I worked on this year were pretty typical projects for any boat owner who keeps their boat in a saltwater environment. Here's what I did this year. On the East Coast, especially along the ICW, the swamps and marshes put a lot of tannin in the water, which is a chemical that tints the water with sort of a tea color. The tannin tends to stain the bow of your boat. Boaters often refer to this stain as a mustache. I used a rather nasty but highly effective product called On and Off to remove this mustache, but there are many products available to get this tannin stain off your gel coat. Some boaters just used lemon juice. The blue-colored hull trim stripes on my boat had taken a fair amount of abuse from the pilings at marinas, so I sanded them a bit and put on another coat of 2-part epoxy paint. The underwater metal parts of a boat in saltwater are exposed to corrosion through a process called electrolysis. You can sort of short circuit this destructive tendency by attaching pieces of zinc to the metal. The electrolysis still happens, but it will now eat the zinc instead of eating your propeller and shaft. Believe me, it is much less expensive to replace the propeller zincs every few years than it is to replace the propellers. In this picture, you can see a 2-year-old zinc side by side with a brand new zinc protecting my propeller shaft. Zincs have a hard life. When your boat is hauled out of the water, the yard will pressure wash the underwater portion of the hull for you, which generally has accumulated a delightful accumulation of slime and barnacles. But as you can see, the pressure wash doesn't remove everything. I gave my propellers and shafts a pretty good sanding, then put on some metal primer paint. The hull got a much less vigorous sanding. Then everything got a couple coats of underwater anti-fouling paint. This paint contains copper to discourage slime and barnacles from returning anytime soon. I use ablative paint, which slowly disappears over time as the copper is slowly used up. It is common to use one color of anti-fouling paint on the base coat next to the hull and a different color for the bottom paint layers that are applied over the top of the base coat. In this way, if your boat is hauled out and you can see that base coat color, you know for certain that it's time for more bottom paint. On my boat, there are 4 benches built into the upper deck to sit on. Each bench has a piece of plywood on top of it that acts as an access hatch to a storage compartment inside the bench. The plywood has been held in place with 1,000-year-old duct tape, which in theory created a watertight seal around the plywood access hatch. Up to this point, I had never removed the plywood hatches, but for this haul out, I decided to find out what was inside those seats. The answer was rusted boating accessories and rotten wood. The 1,000-year-old duct tape had allowed rainwater to get inside the seats, probably for the last 999 years. Most of the rusted boating accessories went directly into the dumpster. Then I went into demolition mode and tore out the rotted plywood floors inside the benches. What a mess. I made new hatch cover boards and gave them a coat of epoxy. Then I sealed it all with brand new duct tape for the next 1,000 years. One of the last projects I started was to begin the process of refinishing the hatch above my forward cabin. I continued to work on this project as the boat made its way north up the Chesapeake Bay. As I was finishing up my boat projects and doctor appointments in Norfolk, my new shipmate, Rick, flew in from Arkansas to join me for the next 3 weeks. Rick was a retired engineer that had sailed his own boat primarily in the Great Lakes. We eventually made good our escape from Norfolk on a beautiful May morning as Rick piloted the boat past the jetty and out into the Chesapeake Bay. Other than dealing with a little wind from astern, it was mostly a pleasant but uneventful cruise. The exception was a huge sea turtle that Rick spotted as we passed by. I would guess that the turtle was somewhere in the neighborhood of 2 feet in diameter. We ran up to Mobjack Bay that day. Mobjack is within easy striking distance of the Norfolk area and has a gazillion different potential anchoring areas. We anchored in the Severn River. The wind got a little enthusiastic that afternoon, but settled down by evening. I took advantage of the downtime to bake some bread. In true bachelor fashion, I just used saucepans instead of bread pans. I figure the bread will taste pretty much the same no matter what shape it is. I am also highly skeptical that a second rising is necessary for the bread, so I skipped that step too. It is a classic example of bachelor bread. In the morning, we got an unusually early start for our trip up to Deltaville. The plan was to get there before the wind got too enthusiastic. It was a great theory, but it didn't work out all that great in actual practice. Deltaville has several overnight options for a boater who is just passing through. On the north side of town is an inlet leading to a very protected harbor. Fishing Bay on the south side also has a marina, along with a large anchorage, where I typically throw out the hook. Since the weather guessers were talking about a south wind, I decided to anchor on the south shore of the Pankatank River. We launched the dinghy later and took turns rowing along the shoreline on a warm afternoon. On Saturday, we motored up to Reedville, just south of the Potomac River. We cruised up Cockrell Creek, passing by the very big and very smelly seafood factory along the way. We anchored near the Cockrell's Creek Seafood and Deli Shop, where we had lunch. After we finished eating, we rowed across the creek to explore the town. There wasn't much to see other than a few restaurants, an excellent ice cream shop, and a very small boatyard. But it was a very nice, small town to take a walk in. We remained at our Reedville anchorage for an extra day on Sunday to let some rain pass through. On a cloudy Monday morning, we crossed over to the eastern shore of the Chesapeake to check out Tangier Island. We entered the island through the West Channel, spent the night at Parks Marina, and left the next morning through the East Channel. Depths were not a problem for us, but we arrived during a period of coastal flooding, so water depths were higher at high tide than normal. Tangier reminded me of some of the fishing villages I had visited on my sailboat in Newfoundland years ago. Crabbing and tourism are about all that goes on at Tangier Island. Rick and I stopped at the Chesapeake House restaurant for lunch, and we were absolutely inundated with food. After lunch, we spent some time walking around the island. Tangier Island is only a few feet above sea level. The walk we did could not have been done at high tide that day. ATVs were the transportation of choice on the island, and they were parked on elevated platforms to keep them above the high water level. Any long-term rise in the sea level will not be kind to Tangier Island. The next day, we made the short hop to Crisfield. Aside from an unusually nice marina and a large number of seafood restaurants, Crisfield seemed to be going through some hard times. The little downtown area was mostly made up of empty storefronts and for lease signs. Rick and I made a pilgrimage to the Food Lion grocery store, and later we managed to find a great little Italian restaurant near the post office. It was pretty breezy that evening in Crisfield, but the wind speed dropped overnight, and we were able to make the hop to Solomons on Wednesday. The weather was just about perfect. Solomons is located across the river from the Patuxent River Naval Air Station, so it is not unusual to have military aircraft flying around. I botched my first anchoring attempt, but had better success on the second attempt. Solomons is a very popular yachting destination, with boats, marinas, and anchorages all over the place. Restaurants are plentiful, and there is a grocery store within walking distance. AIS is one way to display the location, speed, and course of boats and ships around you on a video screen. This video screen can be a display on the AIS device or on a chart plotter or computer. AIS can display information about a vessel that is close to you, even though you can't see it. It sounds similar to radar, but radar has some limitations. For example, if it's choppy seas, a small vessel might be lost in the radar surface clutter. Or, of more interest to me, two vessels could be approaching a sharp bend in a river, with hills and trees preventing the radar and your eyes from seeing the other approaching vessel. AIS uses satellite GPS and VHF transmissions to get around these problems. I used to think that AIS operated this way, with the satellite receiving and distributing all the AIS data to all the vessels, but I was wrong. Although there are some AIS satellites up there collecting information, usually it works a little differently from what I have shown here. Here is a much more realistic diagram of a green sailboat receiving AIS information from a red ship. The red ship receives latitude and longitude data from a GPS satellite. This information is added to other information the red ship knows about itself, such as the ship name and course and speed. All this information is transmitted via VHF radio to any other vessel within VHF radio range of the red ship. The green sailboat now receives this information and displays it on a chart plotter for the sailboat's captain to use. While all this information is being transmitted from the ship to the sailboat is sending the same type of information back to the red ship. Since the captains of both vessels now know about each other, they can communicate on VHF radio about what to do when they meet in the bend of the river. Although AIS and VHF radios both use VHF frequencies, the frequencies are slightly different, so one does not interfere with the other. As a pleasure boat owner, you have three options for this AIS information. Number one, you can use an AIS transceiver to both transmit and receive AIS data, just like the big commercial ships do. Number two, you can use a AIS receiver only, so you can see them, but they can't see you because you're not transmitting any AIS information back to them. Or number three, you can just go without AIS. I would say that the average pleasure boater who goes out on the bay for an afternoon of boating does not really need AIS. In most cases, that boater will see approaching commercial traffic in plenty of time to get out of the way. AIS becomes a much more useful tool if you are operating your boat in the fog or at night or in a twisting waterway where you can't always see commercial traffic around the bend. By the way, if you have been using AIS for a while and have some additional insights, please leave them in the comments section below.
Well, that's about all I got for you now. Rick and I should be heading north from Baltimore up towards the C&D Canal. Ugh, the sun is killing me. And I will have those videos for you shortly, I guess. Later.